I got sent this video where this guy was talking about the idea of Trump being a deflationary president versus an inflationary president. Let's get our definitions straight just really quickly. And by the way, I'm not actually picking on that content creator. I would have stitched his video, but he made it to where you can't stitch it. So otherwise, I would have just given my own response to it. And not in a negative way. I mean, I certainly can see how people will get that impression, but that's not what's going to happen. So let's tear into this. Let's get our definitions right. First of all, there's something called inflation, and then there's deflation. But there's also something in the middle called disinflation. Disinflation is what you're more likely to see. Here's how inflation works. We all know how that works. Inflation is when you create so many dollars, and then those dollars start chasing too few goods and services and too few profit opportunities, that it creates inflation. And it means that your spending power for your currency goes down. That's inflation. That is the textbook technical definition of inflation. Deflation is when your spending power increases with your currency. Your currency starts buying you more, okay? And it starts buying everybody more. In other words, whether it's you having a dollar or me having a dollar, it'll purchase both of us more stuff in the marketplace. That's actual deflation. Disinflation is going to be you going broke and everybody else, you know, in Wall Street and so forth. In other words, you're going to get this. This will be like everybody's going broke, but look at that stock market. That's disinflation. Disinflation is when you manipulate the currency, and this is what you're more likely to see, is going to be disinflation. And of course, there's already the apologists that are all going to get lined up to say, oh, look at this, it's going on, and this isn't Trump's fault, and this isn't, like, no, I mean, in a lot of cases, to be fair, it isn't 100% going to be on the politics side of this. Remember, this is math also, and when you have a lot of boomers, you know, baby boom, so-called, because it wasn't the norm, it was the exception to the rule. You had this huge spike in births. Well, now we're on the back end side of that, and prices should be natural. In fact, prices should have actually started going down in 2008, but they kept inflating it, and they created something called disinflation. This is what hollowed out your middle class to begin with right now. This is why you're hollowed out now. This is why, you know, everybody's like, you know, hey, I'm making more money, making more dollars than I've ever made, but I'm going backward. Like, what the hell? That's because of all the disinflation that they created. There is no reason to suggest that these guys are going to do anything other than just create more disinflation, trying to keep the dollar alive. True deflationary, if somebody, you know, like, let's say that somebody were to be politically, you know, if you were to use the politics of it all, and, you know, if in the case of Orange Man, if he goes in there and says, okay, hey, listen, that's it, screw it, we're just going to go back to a hard currency, then yeah, you would see actual deflation at that point. But you would see it evenly. In other words, you would see all the mega corporations going broke, all of their assets liquidated, all of the bankers liquidated, all of the bankers going broke because there'd be no way to pay any of the interest payments on anything, whether it's the national debt or, you know, or all the corporate bond payments. Like, none of that would be getting done because you'd actually have true deflation, right? Which means that your people who saved money, right, that's when they move in and buy everything up for nothing, right? Your true savers are the ones who go in and say, okay, I'm going to buy it all up now because I can. And then they make it actually profitable. That is not what's going to happen. I assure you, that is absolutely not what's coming. What's coming is something called disinflation. And it's going to be, we're going to keep the same people at the top. We're going to keep the same people involved in all this, and of course it's going to be, you know, peddled by, you know, by their lackeys, you know, their media lackeys and socialist media influencers, that it's because these people are geniuses. No, they're not smart. They're not geniuses. They just have access to money, printed money, before you do. That's it. There's no geniosity involved in that. There's no intelligence involved in any of that. If you have access to a printing press and can print yourself more money than somebody else, you're going to be rich. It's just that simple, okay? And you just have to be smart enough to be able to run the printing press, which isn't terribly difficult, okay? So this is what's coming. I take issue with what he's suggesting. I mean, like, yeah, maybe you'll see a few prices here and there go down, but the question is that, are there any more new small businesses, true small businesses, being created by small business owners? And remember, that's number 3 on the list. Okay. Are you going to see birth rates, domestic birth rates increase? That's number 2 on the list. You're probably not going to see that, because in order to get number 2 to happen, okay, in order to get that to happen, in order to get people to, like Americans, to start wanting to have kids, they have to be, women in general have to feel, and I can say whatever I want now because we're well past the time that I can talk about whatever I want now. Women in general have to feel secure. Okay, in order, now, I mean, once women feel secure, right? I mean, then they'll spread their legs like, whipped butter over a hot steak. I mean, and you'll have kids everywhere, but you're not going to get that until there's security involved, or the feeling of security. And you're not going to get the feeling of security until average men are making enough money to actually support all of that. And you can't get that through the corporate mechanism, right? Through what used to be called the communist mechanism in the former Soviet Union. Like, oh, well, why aren't people doing this or people doing that? Why aren't people working harder? This was Joe Stalin's big problem. Why aren't people working harder? It's because they're not really incentivized in the natural sense, right? Now, you can go and execute them publicly, like Stalin did, or Stalin ordered to do, and all of his order following junkies like our police and military. And make no mistake, both of them will do this. They will institute prima nocta if they're asked to. Trust me. Then that'll motivate people for a certain. In other words, you have access to their physical labor, but you don't have access to what's up here. Solzhenitsyn proved that, right? Because they didn't have access to the creative ability. Well, creativity comes from people who are free, right? That's how this works. So, not to belabor any of this, but this is going to be. I think many of you are going to be very disappointed, and I think that what's going to happen is that they're already pre-setting up all the apologists and all the excuses for why everything failed, as opposed to saying, okay, why aren't we going back to a hard currency? Well, we're not going back to a hard currency because that means that the average Americans would start making huge amounts of money very quickly, and all of the big corporate behemoths that live on fiat largesse would go out of business, and all of the bankers would go out of business. All of the banks would collapse. Remember, in the 1800s, the biggest problem bankers had was finding people to take loans. For real. That was their biggest problem. That's what they couldn't get a foothold in the so-called West, the American West, your so-called Wild West. They couldn't get a foothold because people were making so much money on their own. They didn't need banks, right? Nobody wants to owe a bunch of money to bankers. I don't care if you're a pink-haired Fruit Loop or some button-up conservative type. It doesn't make any difference. Most people, if you talk to them, would prefer to not owe any money to a bunch of fucking bankers, right? Well, they are not going to sacrifice the bankers. They're not, I'm just telling you, Trump is not going to do this. Trump owes too much money to bankers. And for those of you wondering, well, but it's all dollars and so forth, not at that level. At that level, you're agreeing to all kinds of crap. When you start signing contracts at that level, I've mentioned this before. Do you really think that a billionaire just walks in and says, "Yeah, give me $1 billion and I'll just do it when I'll pay"? No. You sign other contracts as well that says hey, you're going to do this and you're going to follow this agenda. And when we say jump, you're going to jump immediately and then say how high while you're in mid bounce, right? That's the real deal that nobody will talk about. How do I know all this stuff? Because I pay attention. We already talked about that. I mean, you pay attention long enough and you see enough of this stuff and you keep your mouth shut for a long time, like I did for many, many years. You learn. And you watch all this stuff happen, and that's why none of you know my background. Well, I'm not inclined to tell you either. So that's what's coming. What's coming is disinflation, not deflation. Let's just make sure that we're on the same page on this. Deflation is everybody getting richer. Disinflation is you getting poorer. But look at that stock market, and look how awesome it is for boomers. That's more likely what's coming.